This Week in Economics on the 18th of August, 2018, from WBRN Radio and on the Bostonred Network. This is the Numbers Man division here. We are talking about macroeconomics, and we'll roll along with it. One of the things we are attempting to do is shorten our broadcasts. Some gurus someplace, internet radio gurus said, well, a shorter podcast is always better. We agree with the general proposition, of being shorter, but at the same time we want to get at least enough economic facts in so a person can intelligently determine what is actually occurring. So thus we use many different benchmarks and adding other benchmarks. Today we'll be talking about consumer sentiment. That's from the University of Michigan. We've used that particular survey for a number of years. It does gauge where consumers are, and with the U.S. economy and many other industrial capitalist economies, consumers account for 70 or 80% of the economy. Thus, the sentiment of consumers is very important as to what is going on. We also have some anecdotal evidence coming out of Ames, Iowa, the home of the University of Iowa, roughly about 40 miles, and it would be, 40-something, 45, 46 kilometers from Des Moines, the capital of Iowa. Each presidential cycle, hundreds of talking heads, media experts, etc., descend upon the descend for the Iowa primary, I should say, and they fan out across the state of Iowa, because the Iowa primary comes right after the or before. They've changed that around, the New Hampshire primary. New Hampshire first in the nation, and of course Iowa, and he sort of changed it around a bit, but nonetheless, from the cornfields in Iowa and the snow in the winter, the heat in the summer, they descend. But this is a look at one restaurant worker there in Des Moines and the struggles that she faces, which we can translate to the struggles of ordinary people that go more into the microeconomic sphere, but we are using macro here to bring this about. Example, the Federal Reserve in September will raise its interest rate because of inflation. And we start to look at a little bit at the current administration's economic programs. We started out with a huge tax cut. Tax cuts themselves, particularly corporate tax cuts, are inflationary. You're attempting to boost the economy, so therefore you're going to get some inflation. And on the corporate level, roughly a 20% tax cut, 15, 20 to 20%, depending on the amount that various corporations paid. And the majority of this money was put into stock buybacks. Rav Nader has an interesting commentary on that. He's using Apple as an example, and the $1 billion basically that Apple used to buy back their stock. And that went from one corporation to the next corporation. And what that does is, once it's bought back, that raises the value of the company. Apple became, quote-unquote, the first $1 trillion company. Does that have very much meaning? No. In the larger scheme, there will be Google coming after it. It's close to $1 trillion. It will make it there. So in other words, we'll have the $1 trillion club, whereas 30 years or more, we'd have the $1 billion club. But things do obviously change, and inflation. But one of the things to remember when we look at $2018 as compared to I believe 1979. I don't have my notes here. But basically, workers are in the same position that the early 70s. They're making $4 an hour, and now $22 an hour. It has the same type of buying power. And this is where there are problems. Cities across the U.S. are talking about putting special commissions in place, putting some type of caps on rents, and building more quote-unquote affordable housing. But those are just some of the things that are going on here in terms of where industry is going. Now we also get the tariff program that's come into, I guess we'll say, being. I hate to say that, but the global fight with various countries. Turkey is one of the new, as they say, inductees in the Trump administration's tariff war. Tariffs were used in the early 1900s, the Holly-Smoot tariffs, but historians have shown a direct correlation to the quote-unquote Great Depression. So they're not something to be used willy-nilly. I get a non-economic term there. This is one of the things that does bring about many, many problems. Now, in past years, it would take a number of months and sometimes a year or more for these for tariffs to filter into the general economy. But today, things are much quicker, and also at the same time, in the 30s, the 20s, and the 70s, 60s, the economy was not globalized. So when Turkey has a problem with its currency, that contagion can go to Italy and other nations in the EU that trade more directly with Turkey. The Russian Federation does some trade with Turkey, but they're not doing it in dollars. You can see a lot of that going on. So in other words, a totally different situation. And we'll touch on the Tesla Corporation. They have a unit called boring. The idea is to bore under various places so they can put their autonomous cars in there, and we'll talk a little about that. Well, now we'll go to a General Reuters article about consumer sentiment and then to the University of Michigan. The headline here is Consumer Sentiment Hits an 11-month low, inflation in focus, and they cite the cost of living. And we'll skip it and go to the actual survey. Decline in sentiment was concentrated amongst households in the bottom third income distribution, adding that consumers' views on prices for big-ticket household items, household goods, were least favorable in 10 years. Inflation has been rising in recent months, driven by strong domestic demand. The labor market is viewed as being near or at quote-unquote full employment. Economists say consumer unease with pricey goods can be linked to the protectionist policies of the Trump administration, which have led to escalation of a trade war between China and the U.S., the EU, Canada, you name it, Mexico and Turkey. Decline suggests that face value that recent escalation of trade tension may be worrying some consumers. That is from Andrew Hunter. He's at the U.S. economist at Capital Economics, but the details suggest that the biggest factor has been a recent rise in inflation. Consumer price index increased at 2.9%. That's year over year, which was the largest since 2012. The Federal Reserve preferred measurement, personal income consumption, that's PCE index, excluding food, energy, at 1.9. That was in June. Core PCE here hit the U.S. Central Bank's 2% target for the first time since 2011. Consumer inflation expectation over the next 5 years rose to 2.5 earlier this month from 2.4 in July. Consumer spending accounts for 2%. Two-thirds of the U.S. economic activity, increasing at 4% annually in the second quarter. That helped to lift gross domestic product to 4.1%, the fastest in 4 years, and almost double the 2.2% in Q1. Now the problem here is, and this is some economists pointed this out, DJ Trump and company were talking about 3.4% growth. That immediately brings about inflation. And so how do you deal with inflation? Well, the tool that the Feds have is cutting interest rates. That's schoolboy simple. Today's report shows that consumers perceive themselves to be worse off financially currently as a result of affordability issues related to big ticket consumer items and housing. And housing is the big part that's from Barclays in Washington. Yursi is the economist involved there. Let's go to the University of Michigan. In August of 2018, the consumer sentiment at 95.3. In July, in July it was at 97.9. In August of last year, it was at 96.8. That's a change of a negative 2.7%. Current economic conditions at 107.8 in August, and in July it was 114.4. And last year, this time, it was 110.9. The change is a negative 5.8%. The index of consumers is at 87.3. It was 87.3 in July, 87.3 last year. From Dr. Curtin. He is the chief economist there. Consumer sentiment slipped to its lowest level since last September, which is a decline concentrated amongst households in the bottom third of the income distribution. Dominating weakness reflect much less favorably on assessment of buying conditions, mainly due to less favorable perception of market prices. Buying condition for large household items, normally called durable goods, sunk to its lowest level in 4 years. When asked to explain their views, consumers voiced the least favorable view on prices for household durables in 10 years. Since October, and this was at the start of the Depression of 2008. Vehicle buying conditions were viewed less favorable in August than at any time in the last 4 years, with vehicle prices being judged less favorable any time in the just a second here. I got ahead of myself. In early August, and anyone in the any time in the past 10 years, with housing prices judged less favorable than any time since 2006. These are extreme shifts in price perception, given that consumers anticipate an inflation rate in the year ahead of 2.9 in early August, on change from last month. The data suggests that consumers have become much more sensitive to even relatively low inflation rates than in past decades. As usual, at this stage in the business cycle, some prices resistance has been neutralized by rising wages or compensation. My words, not Dr. Curtin's. Although the fallout in favor of price perception has been much larger than ever before recorded. Overall, the data indicates that consumers have little tolerance for overshooting inflation targets, and to the benefit of the Fed's interest rates now play a more decisive role in purchase decisions. Now this is from the Washington Post. That was Dr. Curtin. We'll put that up there. This is stuck in the doldrums of wage rise in the nation's hottest job market, but so do costs. This is the story of Isabel Montezuma. She is a cook in Ames, Iowa. She's 39 years old, worked this summer in a restaurant kitchen for $11.50 an hour, less than what she made as a cook 6 years ago. Now, that's an interesting situation there. You have full employment there, but at the same time, she's making less money. The rest of the year, she works as a cook at the Iowa State University, which pays a little better than that. She's seen help wanted signs all around town. Montezuma lives in what might be the nation's hottest job market, metro area with the lowest unemployment rate. It's hard to imagine 1.5% is not a new claim to fame. Ames has boasted the nation's lowest annual average unemployment for more than 2 years. A relatively small thing, about 80,000 people in the Ames, Iowa area there. The unemployment rate is often viewed as a barometer, and that is a big mistake many times for how the country is doing. And the places with the lowest are usually described in breathless terms as boom towns where workers are flawed and fought over. But what is happening in Ames highlights an experience much of the nation appears to soon to confront. The economy is growing faster, unemployment is falling, yet wages barely budge. When they do, higher costs can wipe out the value. Governments report in early August that Americans on the average were making less money than they did at this point last year. Now, see, that is in itself a very big problem. This explains the current expansion felt so weak for so many. The Ames experience illustrates how it occurs. Some employers have turned to tactics other than raising wages and to hire workers. Some workers, particularly parents, struggle with employment. Employers increase demand for weekend work and just-in-time schedule. Some of the barriers to better-paying jobs are old, like the Iowa shortage of affordable child care. Others are newer, such as state lawmakers last year weakening the bargain power of unions. And this has been pointed out time and time again. And these are the kinds of things that go into the political sphere and how they are presented to working people. The metro area there is flourishing region. It's 100,000. I said 80,000 around, obviously, the university, Iowa State University, 40 miles north of Des Moines, Iowa. It's interesting because of this particular place. They have the Iowa State University National Animal Disease Control Center and the Energy Department's Ames Laboratory. And they also Bareilles pasta plant is expanding there. Well, that may be so, but the prevailing wage cap there is not expanding. Local businesses need to be created to find workers. Started allowing people to drop in unannounced for interviews. They call it Walk-In Wednesday. Hospitals also become offering sign-up bonuses. That's another situation out there. I was at an apartment complex, very interesting there, giving a fee of $200 if you could find a walk-in head to come and sign up. It used to not be the case. Now, let me get this here. On here. John Crawford, he's the owner of Alpha Copies. I've heard of one of those somewhere. Anyway, rotating the location of his help wanted sign. That used to be an old thing back in the 60s and 50s. Various businesses would keep a help wanted sign out there. At times they didn't want anyone, actually. But they would take the name down it's like changing wallpaper. Crawford said they noticed the change, but wage increases were also not yet part of the picture. He expects he will need to offer $15 an hour. That's when the economy says you don't have to have 10-cent copies anymore. Well, I need to get more creative on that also in bulk. And at the same time, demand has not fallen at the Food Bank of Iowa. This is one of the situations that in many of these localities, charitable organizations, NGOs, are increasingly offering assistance. And in some, actually, the corporate community is actually donating some assistance to stabilize people. The average work week in Ames area grew modest inflation adjustment to 7.4% from 2013-2017. That was slightly faster than the states and the nation, but income growth for families in Ames were slowed by a comparison. Ames is becoming more expensive, and this is Zeller there. The median price of a house is up 9%, $230,000. The median rent for a two-bedroom has risen 10% to $930 a month in Ames. Now, this is where residents compete with 36,000 students. The rents are going to be higher in a so-called college town. For Ms. Montezuma, her rent went up $50 the last 2 years and $30 more last year. If I can count correct, it's $130. She got a nice letter saying the increase is just $10 this time around. So in other words, they've got as much as they could get. She opens a window, cuts back on air conditioning, eats out once a month trip to Mickey D's, drives an old truck that her church helped her buy. It's a very sad situation here, but it is the norm. She even tried moving to Chicago, didn't want to deal with the city, likes the Ames Public Library, but they offer free lunches for children 3 days a week. During June and July. Demand was so strong that the next summer free lunches were expanded to 5 days a week and into August. This is because school is out and the school lunch program is not there. She does her summer job search at the library and login saw more than 2,000 job openings. She applied all over at Target, Hy-Vee, restaurants, hotels. Some places wanted her to work weekends and nights, and she has children. The best offer came from the Texas Roadhouse. It was only 30 hours a week. This is another problem there. Rev Nita pointed this out, that people are working less than the norm. In other words, the norm used to be basically 40 hours a week. But in many places, there was overtime also there. That's another discussion. But her main job still at Iowa State at the dining hall, where she started 6 years ago on the night shift. Sometime asking her boss if she could bring Maria to work with her. Child care was always a worry. Amir, attends a reduced fee day camp. She likes her job at Iowa State. And a union member, she received a regular 2% raise regular raise from almost 2% to 7%. But that changed last year when the Republican disease in the legislature passed a law gutting public sector unions. Collective bargaining was severely restricted, and large pay raises ended. The union got a 1% pay hike, and this is a result of de-unionification, that pay hikes are less, and Isabel's health care costs $80 now costs $80 a month. I assume at one time it was much, much less than that. And these are some of the results of these policies. Her job pays about $35,000 a year. She asked a church deacon for advice, John McCurley. He's 83 years old, retired Iowa State English professor. Treats her like a favorite daughter. He noticed that Ames has been growing and filling with new houses and nice cars. This isn't helping those who are poor. No doubt about it. This is gentrification and the result of a gentrification. And if she's off from the Texas Roadhouse, she volunteers at a local food kitchen. So in other words, Ms. Montezuma is a very busy person. But that is anecdotal information, but it does bring home what is actually happening out there to ordinary people. Let me just try to start. Where are we going to start here? With the Elon Musk tunnel boring company. He seeks an exemption because some of his tunnel boring machines, at least parts, are from China. It's owned by him. Is trying to lower the cost of building high-speed transit tunnels. Has asked the Trump administration for an exemption on some Chinese-made tunnel boring machine components. Evidently, China is ahead of the curve on this. At one time, that technology was in the U.S., but now it's in the world. The boring company, he called it, Boring. Anyway, a letter in July, the 31st of July, the Boring company asked the U.S. Trade Representative to exempt parts like cutter heads, screw conveyors, and related equipment. Here, privately held Boring added that working to develop and manufacture our own tunneling equipment. And this is one of the very interesting things in industrial capitalism, and in particular the knowledge sector, that at a certain time you get more or less parity. And now China has the knowledge and also the machine tools to do this. The company has said and noted that tunneling is not one of the 10 sectors. This is made in China 2020. But China has many high-speed trains, etc. Proposed building a $1 billion underground transit tunnel in Chicago. The tunnel would send people from downtown Chicago's Loop District to O'Hare Airport at 150 miles per hour. They have plans in other cities also. Initial plans to ferry passengers between Washington and Baltimore on an autonomous electric vehicle carrying 8 to 10 passengers at 150, 120 miles an hour. Another project is a 3.6 mile tunnel between Dodger Stadium in Los Angeles and the city's subway system. Remember when LA had no subway system at all. In fact, LA got their subway or train system late in the ball game. They were a car city. Some of that is fortunately changing. Like I said in the letter, it is converting from diesel power to electric power construction equipment. It has innovations in cement mixing, segment production, excavation, and hauling processes. Other companies involved. This is the General Motors Corporation. They've also sought exemptions. So this is a new situation. At one time, in the Hollywood tariffs, you didn't have any exceptions. You just had the tariffs themselves. So where will they stand? Well, very difficult to say. This is from Reuters. We just touch on this a little bit here. Western sanctions imposed in 2014 on the Russian Federation for the annexation of Crimea. Firms as Rosneft and various others there, they've done little to hurt the Russian Republic industry growth. And it hit a high of 11.2 million barrels per day in July, and climbing faster The Russian petroleum industry effectively halted borrowing from Western institutions. That was in 2004, 4 years ago, and relying on its own cash flow. These companies are now under economic sanctions. That just means that their economies are too weak at the present time to withstand the economic violence from the U.S. But all of that is changing, and this is one of the things the administration just realized. The tariffs they have now in 2018 is becoming more of a one-time deal or two-time deal. In the coming years, in the next 3 to 5 years, it will probably be impossible for them to execute tariffs on most industrial nations, i.e., we talk about the Russian Federation, China, and various others that are large enough. Now, small countries, they would be able to extend that. We remember what happened to Zimbabwe and the sanctions there, but that's a very small economy. Now, there's the bill from hell that was introduced on August the 2nd. The ruble has fallen 10%, and the Russian banking is down 20% since the legislation was introduced. But the oil sector has climbed to 2%, leaving them 27% higher this year. So the sanctions bill in Gazprom, was one. That's a gas exporting monopoly, has maintained its output since 2014, actually increasing exports to Europe, an all-time high, securing 34% of the EU market. And Chinese money, there has been a similar shift in ventures between Russia and Western companies. Decades ago, dozens of projects were planted, but the number has shrunk to a few ventures now, and that's one of the changing things. ExxonMobil is there, and the Italian Eni, for example, have dropped plans to help the Russian development offshore. And ConocoPhillips sold out from Russia's biggest private company, Lukoil. Anyway, so in other words, they're moving out of there. Dutch Shell is still around there. France's Total has been considering a new liquefied gas project with Gazprom there in the Russian. The weakest link in the Russian oil industry in the face of sanctions have traditionally been high-end Western technology. Excuse me. And complex drilling, hydraulic fracturing, RIT has been those. But those are rising. Drilling and service market is worth $20 billion. Companies such as Schammenberger there and Halliburton, those service companies, have benefited from that. But those are more short-term benefits. Over the next 5 years, that in itself will disappear. Rosneft's own drilling subsidiary has doubled its market share to 25%, meaning the company has become almost self-sufficient. And this ultimately happens with any technologies. As technologies get to be better due to the knowledge of component, and also with better technologies as they are used. In other words, in real-time situations, it gets to be a much better situation there. Let me just move on here. I had Walmart. I spent a lot of time on Walmart. This is from BBC. Their shares up 10% on news of online sales lift. But again, it's a mixed situation. Online sales at the Walmart scored 40% in the last 3 months, helping boost the overall sales to 128 billion. That would be 105 billion pounds. The UK subsidiary Esta, which is merging with Salisbury reported 4/10 rise there. That's slower than the 3.4% recorded in the first 3 months. So slowing down in Europe also. The Amazon fret today results. Walmart were among the world's worst performers on the Dow. It's down 13% so far this year. Investors worried that customers were increasingly turning to online retailers such as Amazon. Stores bought online retailer Jet.com for $3 billion. That was in 2016. Despite the performance, Walmart reported $861 million loss due to pre-tax of $4 billion on sales of an 80% stake. Oh, it's a Brazilian operator there. So in other words, not all rosy for them. And also for Uber, this is from the BBC, income from global taxi business once it's paid its drivers rose 2.7 billion, that's 2.1 billion pounds in the last quarter. Cost of expansion plans in the areas like bike sharing, make that Uber Eats, its food delivery business have meant losses have grown rapidly. The company said adjusted losses in the last 3 months rose 32% on the previous quarter to $404 million. Now, in May, a conference in California, the food delivery business Uber Eats was taking 6 billion booking a year, growing at 200%. But a lot of people are in that particular business. And in New York, they're in New York City, imposed a temporary cap on the Uber and ride-sharing vehicles. And that is one of the things that is coming to other cities near you. So Uber is not what it used to be there. And also Uber is trying to get to autonomous cars and eliminate their drivers as soon as possible. Now let me see a pickup. Oh, the China airline. Yeah, we don't want to forget them. Booking a flight from London to Sydney can paint a telling picture of the big changes in global air travel. That used to be the domain pretty much of the U.S. and to some extent the British and the French. Remember Pan American. But anyway, not so now. You can go from Bangkok to L.A. or from Singapore to New York. Cheap tickets are offered by China Airline. So they have this. They built more planes. If you want to fly between Bangkok and L.A., they're on the same date. The lowest tickets were offered by China Eastern Airlines. If you don't mind a stopover in a Chinese city you might have never heard of, and how the 12 hours in Jiangdo or whatever it is, leisure and business travels that can offer and often save a fair amount of money. The old idea of stopping over somewhere, walking around the airport or whatever. You have China Air, China Eastern, China 7. They have some state subsidies, but so do all these airliners, no matter whom they are. China carriers, they obviously don't reveal their data. They're smart to do that. In 2016, Chinese authorities outside Beijing, Shanghai, and Zhejiang spent up to 8 billion yuan, that's 1.3 billion, subsidizing airlines, mostly towards international flights. One of the smaller Chinese carriers, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, Programm. Wait a minute. Yeah, okay. Which offers a service to Los Angeles from Hangzhou. And both flights are said to rely heavily on a subsidy. Well, the subsidies themselves, the airlines here get indirect service subsidies. They also fly military personnel, etc. Not as many today as before. And various other subsidies in terms of being at airports around the U.S., etc. But those even up over time. You can expect China with its 1.12 or whatever billion people, and the potential travelers in that area of the world that China is in is coming to be more and more people. And also, that more Chinese tourists are coming to the U.S. because it's cheap to be here. You'd expect that also. And on the average, about $7,000 per year. That's $5,500 per trip. I'm sorry about that. In terms of pounds, that's the U.S. Travel Association. So these are short trips. So in other words, they do add up. There's no doubt about that. I think we have pretty much exhausted. The EU bailout program is finally over. That was primarily for Greece on August the 20th. Their bailout loans to Greece, Ireland, Portugal, Spain, and Cyprus. I think my friend Vicky will be happy about this. But the Greek economy at one time had 25% unemployment, and more in Greece and Spain, 50% for young people. So everything is not rosy there now, but they have finished that milestone, and I suppose they can get back to regular work. Let me just check a few other things. Don't want to miss anything. I looked at pay scale, incidentally. Nothing new there. This is from the Washington Post. I'm not sure. Something we had saying around U.S. wage growth is being wiped out entirely by inflation. This is on August the 10th. So perhaps we reported this, but we'll just, I think we reported it one time anyway, cost of living at 2.9. That in itself is a lowball figure. We have much more than a 2.9. Let me just quickly go here and do the markets before I forget the market data. We'll use the BBC, not complete, but we'll do the best we can with what we have here, so to speak. We'll start with Hang Seng at 0.42, the Nikkei at 0.35, and in Bombay they were at 0.75 there. In Europe, in Amsterdam, they were at a negative 6.2. The FTSE was a negative 0.09 there. That's the FTSE. FTSE 100 actually was at 0.3. That was a FTSE 260. In France, they were closed. We're closed now. Sorry about that. At 0.08%. The DAC in Frankfurt was also down at 0.22 in the negative there. In Spain, they were down 0.111% in the negative there. 11 tenths, I should say. In New York, they were at 0.43. NASDAQ at 0.13, the S&P 500 in Chicago at 0.33, and we gave those. And let's see, we get the commodities here. Brent crude was up 59 at 56% at $71.83. It was up 40 cents. West Texas Intermediate was at $65.91, up 45 cents there. T-Boone picking his retirement is jumping for joy. Gold on the Forex down 0.25 at $1,176.70 there. And let's see, natural gas. I'm not sure why we want to mess with natural gas. Let's see what natural gas. 4 cents there with natural gas. Let me just take a quick look here to Bloomberg, because I want to get the Bloomberg commodity index. We usually always have it. And we'll quickly zap over to commodities. And get the screen up here so we can look at it. The Bloomberg commodity index. Let's see, where is it at? Let's see. At 172.06. The UBS index at 913.83. The value of it there. And change in it. The Reuters at 192.02. And the Reuters International Index, let's see where it is. It's 2 days here. Well, the change here is 13.49. We'll look at energy. We already went over energy. I think we got everyone in the energy business. We did. And we got gold. Gold on the spot we didn't do. It was up $10.09 at $1,184.25. Silver was down 8 cents at $14.63. We didn't get corn. It was down $1. Let's see. Wheat was up 75 cents. We don't have soybeans here. Interesting. And what else do we have going on here? Cotton was down a negative 0.41. Live cattle was at 110.88. I guess that's the units there for live cattle. Doesn't seem to be our day with commodities here. We're looking at the Bloomberg Commodities Index. And let me just make sure I didn't miss anything on the stock version. Somewhere we have it here. I think we got everybody that we probably needed to get. Yeah, we got Dow Jones. The NYSE Composite Index at we got them. Yeah, I think we got all the Europeans here. Did we get the calc? I believe we did. Yes, in France. I have to sometimes double check these to make certain that we did 0.22%. Was a change there. As a calc, we did Spain. We also did the FTSE. Let's see who else we missed. We did the Nikkei, Hang Seng, that's in China. So we did all of these, fortunately for us. And a quick look, basically about the same. Tesla board torn between a service to stockholder and CEO. Evidently emotional plea there by Mr. Elon Musk. But he was under severe stress, torn apart by the short sellers, and he was basically in tears. A strange situation there, period. In Venezuela, hiked the salaries at 95%, with hyperinflation there, and those are things that are Well, we get into that one. Those are things that we usually don't deal with in terms of inflation. That's inflation caused by economic violence, which is in Venezuela, not by governmental policy, period. Before we head out, this is from Bloomberg. The Trump administration's power plant proposal may increase the carbon pollution. I'm not sure what they plan to do there. Oh, okay. Replace the Obama administration's plan to slash plant greenhouse gas emissions. Roll back here. More catastrophic problems are coming. Now, this is in a summer dominated by wildfires, hotter than normal temperatures. Northern Europe has weathered in a deadly heat wave. California's hottest day in July as recorded there, and at least 116 people in Japan have died this summer, so it's not a time to do it. Let me just do one more thing before we leave here as the gas prices. I guess we'll do, we do this every Saturday. This is a AAA, $2.85 is basically the same place as the AAA gas prices here, and then we have gas buddies or not. We'll try West Coast first. We got, well, and we'll just go to California. Easier to do it there. At Costco, let's see, where is the Costco here? Well, in Irving, it totally went off the wham here. We went to Canada. I'm not sure why we went to Canada. Sometimes things happen when you're doing a live broadcast. Gas buddies, I guess, doesn't like us today. In other words, okay. For some strange reason, we'll try LA finally here. Excuse me. Sometimes there are problems. We usually like to do the West Coast so we can get an idea of what's going on. Because normally the prices are much higher in those areas than not. Perhaps we'll forego gas prices, but basically speaking, gas prices have been somewhat stable. We've not had any here we go, finally. Well, in Livermore, $2.97 there. If we let's see what we have going here. Basically be more Northern California. Let's go down to Los Angeles. $3.21 in Los Angeles. That is at us and Armco $3.20 27 cents. So that's basically, it's around $3.30 is where the gas prices are. If we go up to San Francisco, I'm not sure why we're so engaged in this, but for some very odd reason we are. We won't go to Sherman Oaks. We'll go to San. Wait a minute here. Here we go. San Fernando. It's about $3.30 there also. So we get any of these areas here. I think in California. San Pedro. I'm not sure why we're coming with. Who knows? Oh, I see. This is Southern California. Anyway, we pretty much understand where we're going with this pricing. So that's West Coast pricing. If we go to East Coast pricing, we'll just do the hometown here, headquarters town, Boston, and that'll be our East Coast representative today. We spent too much time, for whatever reason, on this. $3.19, a bit cheaper than the $3.30 out in Los Angeles area. This is Somerville, Southie, roughly $2.99, $3 in Southie. Charlestown, $3.19. So that's it's moving up there a bit. We'll just leave it at where we are right now. We ran over, and I understand why we did. Anyway, for those in business next week, a productive one. And for the consumer, the eye on the prize from the consumer sentiment. You have attested to your eyes being on the prize. Have a good weekend. Good day. See you next week. Sorry about running overtime. But we will get to consumer sentiment from the University of Michigan. We'll append that. Our listeners on iHeart Radio, the mobile app there, they have 800 stations there on YouTube, on Spreaker, on Stitcher, I'm sorry. Anyway, you can tell it's the weekend. It's dog days of summer, as someone said. I'm not sure how wise they were or not. Good day.